Welcome back to Cards and Comics. Today I am going to be talking about collectors, collecting, and somewhat the dark side of what it's like to be a collector. I'm going to give a few examples from my personal life. I started collecting in '86, and how the collecting part of the hobby sometimes doesn't get called out or doesn't get looked at in the same way we look at dealers, flippers, and investors. We think, in some terms, all those people are the problem. And a lot of the reason these things happen in the hobby are because of collectors. And I'm going to talk about it. So the first thing you have to understand is that sports cards isn't alone. Every collectible category that's out there, every thing that's collected has collectors that are toxic, that create problems for that hobby, and their behavior inspires bad behavior in others. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's think about it. If there wasn't a market to buy some of the cards, toys, Hot Wheels games out there, and if the collectors didn't actually, for the most part, buy these products, compete for these products, then some of the things that we see in the hobby wouldn't be happening. And what I want to talk about really is the competition aspect of it. The competition aspect of collecting is what's driving a lot of the bad issues in the hobby. So when I talk about collecting and how it can turn into this, bad thing is, we always talk about money, that the hobby gets corrupted by money. And that's part of it. But the reason why sometimes that money is there is because you have, collectors competing for the highest grade, the rarest pieces, and therefore they're fueling the bad behavior of the rest of the hobby. And we don't really talk about that enough. I feel like the hobby treats collectors like they are unicorns, like they can't be touched. You see in people's videos like The Great Curator, when he talks about I'm a collector, like that should have some sort of like a shield built in that you can't touch collectors. They're sacred, that they don't ever do anything wrong, and they are the ones that really at the high end and in a lot of levels are causing some of these issues to happen. So what I'm going to show is like, if you look at other hobbies, like here's a Reddit forum about gaming and toxicity. Here is blowout forums talking about what do you think is toxic about the hobby. Most of the blowout forum talks about shillers, trimmers, consignments, and just variations of that. You get into YouTube, there's very few mentions of actual collectors. They talk more about maybe being over leveraged, spending too much money, but not the bad behavior that collectors either take part in or they inspire. So I feel like it's really not talked about. So what I'm going to jump to is the PSA registry. And by itself, this registry does something good for the hobby. It allows people to, compare themselves to each other. It allows them to kind of see how their collection stacks up. But in general, what it did since the beginning was it pitted collector against collector for, supremacy and whatever set, whatever thing they collected. And if you think about it, a lot of these collectors that are wealthy, they got there because they were competitive. So as soon as they saw, well, I'm going to compete, I'm going to start, driving to find, I'm going to ask dealers to grade more cards, grade more of the cards I need. I need them in this shape. Well, when you start saying, I need this card in this shape for my set, all of a sudden you have now the perfect ingredients for trimming, altering, and all the shenanigans that we see in the hobby today. And it's not, and if you don't think PSA pushes this, look at the dashboard. They have competition, they have your completion, they give you points, they rate you. I'm rated down here, in the 6,000s because I haven't updated my PSA registry in like 4 or 5 years. Honestly, my highest rated set's a 3.7, out of the 21 I've registered, right? They give you medals. They do all this stuff to encourage you to compete, to go buy more cards, to start more sets, to do all these things so that you buy more of their cards, right? It's their tool to get people to buy more, but it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. People don't understand this is what grew the PSA brand so much when it first started, because you had all these, wealthy collectors now competing for the number one 52 top set, 53 top set, Hank Aaron, Mickey Mantle, all these, T206 sets. That became a huge part of it. Now, and then along with it came, I need my T206 cards in 7 or above. They don't exist that way, so I'll go create them. And that did happen. People created these cards so that people could have higher value in their registry. And that created shenanigans. And again, the collectors themselves were targeted. So, I know a lot of, high-end collectors, not, just personally sometimes, but, when you go to enough card shows, enough dealers, you know who they're buying for, who collects what. And, if someone found out that you were collecting something, you would get unsolicited, offers to buy cards. A lot of the big time collectors that are out there would talk about, that they, would have a third party buy. This idea of a third party buyer was because they didn't want people to know who the actual collector was, because they didn't want to get cold called. They didn't want, someone just saying, I've got this card, you need it in your registry set. Because you can see the registry sets, who's got what. If you're smart, you can see who they are and who's doing what. Once you figure that out, that kind of happens. And that's also toxic. Like, no one wants to get a call at work from a guy saying, hey, do you want to buy my 52 tops, Eddie Matthews card because I see you need it for your set. That's not something you want to have happen to you. But that, I know that's happened to a few people, where they, that people knew what they were collecting and they knew they were paying the most. And that's another thing too, is a lot of these collectors that built these sets would pay the most money. So of course the dealers and people knew who they were. So they were, trying to inundate them with offers to buy cards or go out and find. I knew dealers that would go out and they would scour the registry sets looking for cards that these guys needed. They would go out and either grade them, find them, do whatever they could to make these cards available to these registry owners, and then basically call them and say, hey, I've got this card you need for your set. Here's what I want. Here's my price. And again, sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. I've heard from dealers that, try to talk to Marshall Fogel and got the back of the hand, for cold calling, or trying to basically extort him, for a card. So that does happen, and so that's all to me negative, like, cold calling, extorting, all that stuff, but it's driven by the collector's need to have the best set, and it's competition. And, I think about myself and my own history in the hobby, and I think about, I've talked about my holy grail, because I'm a Clemente collector, is, a 68 3D Clemente. And I've tried buying it in multiple auctions. I've tried trading for it. Never been able to get one. It's, one of the reasons I don't have my Clemente sets even listed, on the registries, because I know it doesn't matter, because, not having the 68 3D, I'll never complete the master set. And the basic set I could list it, but it doesn't feel like I care as much anymore without being able to have that one card. And but I'm thinking about, like, what would I do if I found someone that had that card that was willing to buy or trade for it? Would I go kind of nuts? Would I do things that were not as up above board to try to acquire that card because it's such a holy grail for myself? And you think about it, like, yeah, you may have your own bad behavior. You may, do some things that you would never normally not do to try to acquire something just because you need it for your set and you need it for your collection. And that's sort of what I'm talking about, is that this kind of creates this frenzy of behavior. And, I'll go through a few things that, I know. I mentioned, like, people selling to these big time dealers or collectors. I resisted for a long time. I don't have any Ken Griffey Jr. cards listed. I don't really grade a lot of Ken Griffey Jr. cards. I've just started. I didn't even admit to myself that I was a Ken Griffey Jr. collector until about 2 years ago. After I amassed probably about 2,000 Griffey cards. Because in my mind, I know that there's these massive Griffey collectors, massive, that have so much inventory of cards I'll probably never get, that I knew a couple things would happen. If I announced myself as a Griffey collector, I would invite people to tell me, that you're not a Griffey collector because you don't have card X. Hey, you're missing card X, so I want to sell it to you. So yeah, we get the, people trying to sell me 90 Donruss Griffey cards. And then I would also be exposed to communities that, do Griffey cards, because to announce it, you're going to go on Blowout, you're going to go on Facebook groups and say, I'm joining your group, I'm a Griffey collector. And all of a sudden, you're going to see all the cool cards that everyone else has that you don't have, that you probably may not ever get. And then you just realize how crappy your set is, or how, bad your cards are, and it doesn't make you want to go out and compete anymore. I've always said, like, I did finally announce it, on Facebook earlier this year. So I joined a Facebook group this year, but I didn't even really recognize, I was a Griffey collector until I got the 93 Finest Refractor. At that point, I'm like, okay, I've got something grailish on Griffey that I can kind of anchor my collection around. And I kind of anchored my collection around refractors. And then I've anchored it around refractors and 90s autos. So you see me doing, those kind of cards, right? But, it just, and I know it sounds silly to be like, well, collect what you love and all this other stuff, but I grew up in the early set registry where it's competition. You put your basic Griffey collection out there and you're ranked number 1,200 out of 2,000. That makes you not feel great. If you're a competitor, right? You're like, I don't even matter in the Griffey universe, right? And that's, again, I think for people who are competitive, people who want to think their own collection is special and cool, that's a lot of negative feedback when you're trying to do something fun and lighthearted. But again, and as soon as I joined the Facebook group, it happened. All of a sudden I'm sharing my collection, thinking, oh, I'm pretty cool, and then I get like, well, do you have this card? 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 Do you want to buy this card? Do you want to sell this card? It's just, and then I see, when sell posts come up and there's cards I need, the feeding frenzy, and just how kind of cutthroat that community is. And I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying it's very competitive. Like they're not in it to be nice to each other. And that's another thing too. I want to really express to people for my, that's my Griffey kind of like not wanting to be a collector because I just knew how brutal that collecting base was in terms of how hard they go at the cards that are rare. It's literally one of the most competitive, outside of Michael Jordan cards and and a few other sets, just brutal competition amongst collectors to get the cool cards, right? But again, I remember like multiple times, you know, telling people I collected certain sets. I remember going to the National. I used to try to collect Topps Chrome black cards, refractors from football. I have the entire 2009 set up until I think last year when I sold the Matt Stafford black refractor auto number to 25. I had the full set of 2009. I have about half of the 2010, 11, and 12 set. Minus some of the big guys, right? But and so I remember on that 2009 set, one of the last cards I needed, a dealer had. It was, a wide receiver. I can't remember his name. He's from the Eagles. He was a pretty good player for a while. And the guy had it. And this was, after the guy curve kind of fizzled a little bit. And I made the mistake of saying it's the last card I needed for the set. And thinking that it was going to be like, oh, well, I'll make you a good deal. I mean, the guy's like, well, $250. He's like, you need it for the last card in the set. Like, you're never going to find it again. It's a steal. Like, you'll finish your set. Like, literally extorted me for that card at the National. Like, and I bought it because I needed it. Because I may not ever see that card again, right? And it sucked. And I knew that someday that card would come up for sale on eBay and sell for like $40, and I'll feel like an asshole. Same thing happened to me on the 2012 Innovation basketball. I don't collect basketball, but for some reason I got in my head I would do one basketball set just to have fun. And I picked the Innovation patch set. Like an idiot, I didn't pick the the downtown set, or the first year of the downtowns, I believe, was in that set. One of the big insert sets. I picked the patch set because it looked cool. I picked up the LeBron James cheap. And the guy had the Jamal Crawford, one of the few cards I need left for the set. It's a big set. I got every card except for like 4. Some are numbered to like 10 or 5. It's some really low number cards. And he had the Jamal Crawford. And he literally, that's the only guy he collected. He had like almost the entire print run. And so I was posting that, I needed these cards for my set on Blowout. He came in and said, I've got this card for you, and I want $1,100 for it. It's like, the set's not worth $1,100. You want $1,100 for that card? He's like, yeah, I have all of them. Every one that's come up, I buy. And, if one comes up for auction, I'm going to buy it. I'll bid you no matter what. So this is my price. I'm like, well, I guess I'll never complete this set. And, and I never have. That set's still sitting in a box, missing those 4 or 5 cards and I don't think some of them actually exist, but that card exists and I don't have it. So I guess I'll never have that set complete. And that's sort of, because again, the toxicity runs both ways. It's, people trying to, I kind of view it in 3 ways. The collector is out there doing things bad to each other. Like we're undercutting each other. Believe me, on eBay, there are people out there emailing people on cards saying like, hey, I know this guy sold it for $1,200. I'll give you $1,500 for it. And then all of a sudden the guy, loses the card, or the inventory's out, and he does an off eBay deal. That happens all the time, because a collector missed out on an auction, so then they'll offer the guy more money for it than what it sold. That happens a lot. It's just, those things, and that's collector to collector, damage. That's collector to collector issues. Then you have the collector creating, the issue where they want the card so bad they're willing to. I call collectors are blind. Like they're willing to trim cards. Is it in the holder? Can I put it on my registry? I don't care. It's happened so often. If I've talked to big time collectors, and a lot of them will tell you they know 100% that they have trim cards in their collection, and they don't want to know. They know they do, but they don't want to know which ones they are because they either have to, replace those cards, their registry sets will go down. They'll have to deal with, trying to get a refund or figure out where they bought the card or whatever. But a lot of it is they don't want their registry numbers to go down. So they are willfully ignorant that they have, trimmed or altered cards in their registry. They don't want to know. And in fact, I have known where people who were informed that, hey, the card you bought is probably trimmed or altered, and they got very upset for being told this. Because now they feel like they have to do something. Or, or their set's tainted. That the set they've been building for years is tainted because someone says their card is trimmed or altered. That has happened. You go on blowout forums, you'll see them sometimes on PSA forums, even though the moderators nuke those, threads pretty often. That has happened. So yes, collectors will turn the blind eye just to get what they want, and that does create the bandwidth for all of these bad issues to happen in the hobby. The trimming and again the altering, because someone on the other end of the transaction is paying for it. Because if these trimmers and alters didn't have a place to sell those things, those assets, they wouldn't do it. But in the same way for fakes and all these other things, if I can get it through grading it in a holder, do I really care? It goes on my registry. I only care about my registry number. Do I really care if the card's real or not? I think you would, but sometimes you don't. A while back when the LeBron James patches on his exquisite rookie card were shown to be replaced or altered, oh my gosh, the collectors who got called out in that that scenario were highly upset as well. So it's happened multiple times. And then the last thing we talk about is, just how being a collector, once you're known as this type of collector, like, Justin as the Marvel PMG guy, then all of a sudden you get targeted. Someone pulls that card you need for your set, and they're going to hold it as, try to extort you for all the money they can, and then that feels like crap too, because then, you don't feel like you're collecting anymore in a fair environment. It's basically because you're a well-known collector that you get taken advantage of. And on that side of it, I will say this. YouTube is not the place to find the collectors. So I'm just going to put that out there. Most big time collectors don't want you to know who they are because of all the things I've just said. They don't want to be taken advantage of. They don't want you to know what they're buying. They don't want you to know where their collections are because of all those things I just mentioned. So if you think that these guys are going on YouTube talking about their collections, a few do, but in general, these big guys, these hobby whales, are pretty quiet. You don't know who they are. You see a few of them on YouTube, not many. And again, most of the time you see the folks talking about their collection is when they're selling. Right? I think Marshall Fogel has been all over the area because I think he's selling his collection, or he's sold some of his collection. That guy was the biggest whale of all of them. But usually you only hear about him when they're getting ready to sell. So that's it today. That's what I want to talk about is, the idea that collectors are perfect, people, that they don't ever do anything wrong is false. And again, a lot of it isn't really due to them doing bad things on their own, but what they allow from their behavior, the things they ignore, sometimes their own behavior does create some of these issues we have in this hobby. So I think we have to hold collectors when they do bad things accountable as well. So that's it. That's my take about this idea around collectors and what issues that collecting causes. So I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.